The gate to Blackbridge War Camp moaned like a wounded animal as it slid open to the winter dark. Floodlights bled white onto frost and mud. Boots struck the parade square in iron rhythm. And then the rhythm faltered because a thin woman with a burn scar curling across her cheek stepped through the gate and into their stare. Rhea Kade didn't flinch. She didn't lift her chin either. She moved as if every inch of the air here had teeth. "Charity case," someone said, just loud enough to carry. "Look at the cheek. Did the stove win?" Another voice added, laughter scattering like shell casings. The platoon's instructor, Captain Daver, didn't waste a salute. "Kade," he said, "you were approved for intake against my recommendation. This place breaks men who were born hard. You weren't. You'll run, you'll shoot, you'll fail, and then you'll go home. Until then, keep quiet and keep out of my way." Rhea's scar tightened when she swallowed. She nodded once. Silence was the only uniform that fit. They issued her a rifle that smelled of oil and old rain. The stock was chipped, the sling rough against her shoulder. The other recruits took turns not looking at her and looking anyway. A woman named Brant smirked like a blade. A heavy-set corporal they called Ox nudged his buddy and mimed a pitying pat on the head. "There are places in the world where strength announces itself with noise," shouted Cadence, clattering mess tins, the crack of shots downrange. Blackbridge was one of those places. Rhea belonged to the other kind. She had learned to smuggle strength in stillness. She had learned to vanish. But there are truths that don't vanish just because you hide them. 3 years and 2 lifetimes ago, a unit that didn't officially exist had typed Rhea Kade into a ledger that didn't officially exist and given her a name that did: Glass Finch. Signal intelligence, irregular. Predictive adversary modeling. Swarm protocol inversion. The kind of brain you only notice when the drones stop killing you and start listening instead. Then a mission went wrong the way a single wire goes wrong quietly and with everything attached to it. Dead men who weren't supposed to be anywhere near the ops swallowed her story when they sank. Command sealed the ledger. They told her to disappear into a different uniform and never open her mouth. "Survive the peace if you can," said the colonel with a scar on his knuckles. "Survive the war because you must." Now here she was, a scarred nobody under lights as harsh as interrogation. She felt the camp measure her like a scale that had never balanced right. She let them. She let the laughter stick to her like sleet. Night at Blackbridge was an iron lung. The dormitory's heat came and went in size. Rhea lay on the bottom bunk, listening to the top springs whine every time Brant rolled. Voices drifted in the dark, that's placed on how fast Kade would wash out, invented stories about her scar, a soft voice sympathy that made the others laugh harder. She turned her face to the wall. In the reflection on the window pane, floodlights turned to moons and her scar to a coastline. If she blinked, the coastline would flood. She did not blink. "They think the silence is empty," she told herself. "Good. Let them." On the range the next day, the wind came knife-cold off the ridge. Ox pointed at her target. "Don't worry, Kade. We painted it big for you." The instructor's voice chopped the air into commands. Magazines clacked. Rounds spat flame. Rhea's rifle bucked and the pain beneath her scar crackled like radio static. Her shots landed near, not on. Captain Daver didn't bother masking the shake of his head, the half-second of disappointment that tasted worse than anger. "You look at the ground when you step," Brant said as they policed brass. "Only people who expect to fall do that." Rhea crouched to pluck a casing from the frost. For a heartbeat she saw, not brass, but numbers and angles overlaying the world, wind vectors and yaw drift, and the subtle curve of flight paths slipping left. Knowledge flickered up her spine like heat. She could have worked the line and taught half the platoon how to read the air, how to ride it. She put the casing in the bag instead. There is a special kind of humiliation reserved for those who know and must pretend they don't. It presses down at first. Then it sharpens. When the sun bled out beyond the ridge and the siren split the evening with a single jagged note, an unscheduled note, not a drill, Rhea felt the camp exhale as one organism. Boots hit floors. Webbing snapped. Someone called for radio checks and got static that shouldn't have been there. The instructor's hand went to his earpiece. He frowned. The air changed. Rhea stood in the corridor, invisible in plain sight, hearing something inside the static that did not belong. If they were laughing at her an hour ago, it didn't matter. Something had come hunting Blackbridge. And the thing about silence is this. It's where you hear the danger first. She straightened. The part of herself she'd been burying scratched at the lid. Tonight, she told it. Just a little longer. Wait for the door to open. The siren still echoed off the ridges as the platoon stumbled into formation. Frost smoked from their mouths. Captain Daver barked roll call, his tone sharp enough to cut panic into obedience. The camp searchlights raked across pine and stone, too wide and too frantic for a drill. Unknown contact in Sector 9, Daver snapped. Possible insurgent incursion. We locked down until further. The radio on his vest screamed static. Not white noise, not a glitch patterns. A coded pulse hidden inside the hiss. Daver slapped the dial, cursed, and tossed a hand signal to his sergeants. Comms blackout until we clear this. Rhea froze in the back rank. That pulse, she knew it. Her blood remembered it. 3 years ago, in an underground bunker, she had sat before a wall of screens when the enemy first learned to lace their sabotage inside static. She had spent 40 sleepless hours unraveling it. They had called it the Wraith pattern. Only 3 people alive could read it without a machine. She was one of them. And yet she stood silent, invisible behind her scar. The platoon armed up. Ox and Brant jostled for the heaviest kit, muttering about how this'll separate the wolves from the sheep. Nobody looked at Rhea except Marin, the young recruit who hadn't yet learned the sport of mockery. His eyes flicked to hers, quick, questioning. She looked away. They split into squads, boots crunching through snow, barrels gleaming under cold light. Rhea's group swept the outer fence line. The trees loomed, black veins against a bruised sky. Somewhere beyond, something moved that shooed. Keep your eyes open, deadweight, Brant hissed. If we get high, Rhea said nothing. She walked with them, breath fogging, pulse steady, brain dissecting the static she'd heard. The pulse repeated every 13 seconds, buried in random noise. Not random at all. It was mapping them, counting their responses, searching for blind spots. They reached the northern watchtower. The guard assigned to it was gone. The spotlight swiveled slowly as if dragged by a ghost hand. Daver's voice crackled through an open channel, distorted, wrong, all units. Maintain, physicians, and underneath it, the pulse again. Rhea closed her eyes for half a second. The code unfolded in her head like a trap looming open. It was no incursion. They were being tested. Probed. Whoever was behind it wanted to see how Blackbridge would react when their eyes and ears turned traitor. Brant kicked the snow. Figures. The coward ran off. He spat, then grinned. Maybe we should leave you up here, Kade. Tower ornament. Ox laughed, heavy and cruel. Even in the tension of alarm, they couldn't resist tearing at her. The others chuckled, thin and nervous. It was easier than admitting fear. Then the world cracked. A flare burst above the trees, blood-red. The platoon dropped into cover, rifles trained outward. Shadows surged at the tree-lined figures, fast and low. Muzzle flashes flared. The camp was under attack. Chaos detonated. Orders flew, half lost in jamming static. Brant fired wildly. Ox bellowed. Marin froze, eyes wide. Rhea crouched behind the sandbags, her mind racing. The pattern in the radio static was no longer mapping. It was guiding the attackers, feeding them Blackbridge's position second by second. She could stop it. She could jam the pattern cold, invert it, turn their own signal into poison. All she had to do was speak. Reveal herself. Break the silence. But the memory of the colonel's words pressed like a boot on her throat. Survive the peace if you can. Survive the war because you must. They had erased Glass Finch for a reason. If she exposed herself now, everything she had hidden would burn. A bullet snapped the wood beside Marin's head. He cried out, stumbled. Brant cursed, shoved him down, and yelled, "Stay out of the way, kid." But Rhea saw the enemy tracer, the line of attack. She knew where the next shot would land. She moved without thought. Her hand caught Marin's collar and dragged him flat an instant before the bullet shredded the air he'd been standing in. He stared at her, shock and gratitude tangled in his young face. The firefight raged. In the command post, Davos shouted through corrupted comms. Squads fled into confusion. Rhea's silence grew heavier than gunfire. She pressed her palm to her ear as if the static were physical, beating against her skull. The code begged to be answered. They think you're nothing, a voice in her memory whispered. Let them. Until it's time. Her scar burned. Her lungs burned. And still she said nothing. Hours later, when the shooting thinned and the attackers faded back into the forest, Blackbridge was left with wreckage. A burned vehicle, 3 wounded men, a hole blown in the outer fence. The medics worked by lantern light. The recruits slumped in exhaustion, faces hollowed by adrenaline. Davor paced like a wolf, fury on a leash. We got played, he snarled. They fed us false signals, turned our comms into knives. Whoever they are, they'll be back. His eyes swept the platoon. They stopped on Rhea. For a heartbeat, she thought he saw through her. But he only shook his head. Some of you don't belong here, he said, voice cold. And when the next attack comes, it'll show. Brant smirked at her again. Ox muttered agreement. Marin looked down, ashamed of his silence. Rhea turned away. Inside her, the pattern of the code still pulsed, still alive, like a secret heartbeat only she could hear. She knew then, hiding forever was impossible. Blackbridge would burn unless she chose to be more than their mockery. But when? And how? Dawn cracked over Blackbridge as if the night had to be pried off with a knife. The parade square smelled of burnt rubber and cordite. A medic's tarp snapped in the wind. Beneath it, a wounded sergeant breathed like an engine that might seize and might not. Captain Davor stalked the fence where the breach gaped, barking orders that sounded like apologies he refused to speak. Rhea kept to the edge of it all and listened. Not to Davor. Not to the crows pecking at frozen bread in the mess yard. She listened to the hiss from the radio masts, faint even here, like seashell surf in another world. The pulse hid inside it still, lazy and patient, as if it knew it had time. Marin found her by the old generator shed, cheeks raw with cold and exhaustion. You saved me, he said, voice rough. Last night. That shot, she looked past him to the ridge. You don't owe me anything. That's not what I'm saying. He hesitated. You heard something in the static. It wasn't even a question. Rhea studied the kid, the way his hands trembled but didn't leave his rifle, the way he was afraid but honest about it. She could tell him nothing and keep the lid on. She could tell him everything and blow the lid into the sky. Walk, she said. They cut behind the maintenance bays to the oldest building on the grounds, a squat cinderblock cube whose sign had been painted over 6 times. Once it had red signal, now it read storage. Rhea palmed the rusted handle. The door stuck, then gave with a moist sigh. Inside, dust lived on the light beams like fog. Shelves slumped with coiled wire, spare fuses, cracked Bakelite handsets, a field teleprinter older than both of them. The air smelled of metal and mice. Marin blinked. We have a museum. We have a solution, Rhea answered. She moved efficiently, waking ghosts, dragging the teleprinter to the center table, cranking the dynamo, checking belts. The machine shuddered, coughed, and began to hum in a rhythm older than jamming. She stripped insulation off a length of copper, ran it to a cracked junction box on the wall, and traced its trunk line with her fingers like a pulse on a throat. You going to tell me who you are? Marin asked. Not derisive. Just curious. Just brave. Someone who used to listen for a living. Rhea plugged a handset into the teleprinter's side jack and brought it to her ear. Someone they told to stop. He waited. In another life, she said at last, I built maps out of noise. The enemy hid their orders in things that didn't look like orders. I unhid them. The code you heard last night? I've seen its bones. They call it the Wraith pattern. Insurgents. She shook her head. No, this is money. Clean boots. A testing cell or a contractor wearing a testing cell like a skin. They're not trying to take Blackbridge. They're probing it. The pattern tells me they'll come again, escalate, numb us with confusion until we step in the trap they actually care about. What trap? The one where Captain Davor calls for help on a channel they've salted, and our reinforcements get led somewhere else. She adjusted a rheostat until the teleprinter's chatter steadied. Or the one where we fire at ghosts until we're empty? Marin exhaled slowly. So we're not helpless. Not if we get out from under their hands. Rhea tapped the old metal. Analog. Wire. Light. Line of sight. Systems too dumb to control and too stubborn to kill. He smiled, a quick white flag in a gray room. I like stubborn. Rhea spread a map of the camp on the table. With a carpenter's pencil, she drew a second map over the first, a nerve map. 3 fixes. She marked the North Watchtower, the motor pool roof, the hillock with the broken monument to a war nobody here had fought. 1. We lift a wire from this box to the tower, 10 minutes, 2 runners, insulated line. 2. We repurpose the target mover motors on the range to run decoy silhouettes. If they read movement through their hijacked comms, we give them a ballet to waste ammo on. 3. We take the searchlights off wide sweep and put them on narrow strobe tuned to the carrier harmonics of the Wraith. It'll saturate their sensors with garbage. Marin was grinning now, despite the cold. You just said a sentence that tasted like electricity. You'll get used to it. Rhea let herself answer the grin with a sliver of one of her own. It felt stranger than drawing breath. We also need a whisper net. When they jam voice, we run line-of-sight signals, mirrors by day, shielded flashlights by night, and runners between fixed points. No radios. No waiting for permission. Marin sobered. Dever won't like any of this. Dever doesn't have to like survival. She coiled the wire and handed him an end. Help me get this to the tower. We'll ask forgiveness on our way back down. They stepped into the cold with copper beating against Rhea's leg like a second heart. Snow squeaked under their boots as they cut toward the tower's base, timing their walk with the sweep of the searchlight so they moved in the dark between its bright fingers. Twice they had to freeze when a patrol clanked past. Twice Rhea saw Brand's silhouette and ducked deeper into shadow than Marin knew existed. At the base of the tower, a padlock sulked on the access hatch. Marin eyed it as if it might bite. Rhea pulled a thin tension wrench from the pocket of her fatigues. He raised his brows. Trade secret, she murmured. The lock whispered open. They climbed inside, hand over hand, until the wind found them through the slats. Rhea's breath steamed. Her fingers worked steady anyway, stripping the wire, bolting it into the old junction box, humming to herself under the howl. The tower creaked like a tall ship. She wished briefly for the sea. She had never seen it. Marin peered out over the camp. From here, Blackbridge looked like a toy lights, smoke threads, people moving like pins. If you were erased, he said softly, why are you here? Because erasing isn't the same as forgetting, Rhea said. And because the ledger changed nothing about the fact that the people under those lights are mine. He swallowed. You're not nothing. Rhea didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her hands finished the splice. The tower hummed. They climbed down. The second fix took them to the range, where target silhouettes slept against their tracks like folded crows. Rhea popped open the control box, kissed sparks out of a fuse, rewired the relay into a loop that would run the movers in a regular pattern: stop, stutter, sprint, pause to mimic human panic. Marin watched and learned. When he fumbled, she showed him again, patience as automatic as her breath. When he grinned at a successful test, tiny motors whirred and dummies jittered, uncanny in the morning haze. Last fix, she said. Searchlights. They found the lamp controls in a hut that had once been a guardhouse and now was a place for bored soldiers to carve names into paint. Rhea brought up the strobe interface. It wasn't meant for what she intended. It would do. She tuned the frequency to a notch that would ride the Wraith carrier like a parasite, filling it with false returns. Then she wrote a loop that would vary a hair to dodge counter-adjustment. Marin leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. He had stopped shaking. You saved me, he said again, as if he had to try the words until they fit. But this saves all of us. Rhea closed the panel. It gives us a chance. They had one more thing to do before hope could bear weight. She walked straight to Captain Daver. He stood with his hands on the breech fence, jaw set so hard it could have been welded there. Brand and Ox hovered nearby like bad weather. When Rhea approached, Brand's mouth twitched with its familiar sneer. Here to offer your weakness as a shield? I need searchlight control authorization, Rhea said to Daver, ignoring Brant-like rain. And in order to run a field telephone line to the North Watchtower. We also need the range movers online. Daver turned. Disbelief didn't quite mask the anger behind his eyes. Kade, this is not the time for requests, and certainly not from, Sir. Last night wasn't a raid, it was a systems test. Our comms were exploited via a patterned carrier. Whoever hit us used Wraith-derived signaling. If we keep playing by their rules, we'll lose. If we move to analog and strobe the carrier, we corrupt their picture. I can do it. I've already started. The words hung between them, sharp and fragile. The world decided whether or not to break them. Brant laughed, loud and grateful for a target. Oh, this is rich. The camp charity case is a secret genius. Ox's chuckle rumbled. Maybe she can fix my toaster after she saves the world. Marin spoke up before Rhea could. Sir, I saw what she can do. Daver's gaze flicked to the young recruit, then back to Rhea. And what exactly are you, Kade? She held his eyes. She thought of the ledger. She thought of the dead. She thought of the way the static had whispered her old name against the inside of her skull. She thought of all the times she had swallowed truth until it burned. Glass Finch, she said softly. The wind swallowed it first. Then Daver heard. Then Brant did, because his smirk faltered. Signal intelligence. Irregular. I was told to disappear. I didn't forget how to work. Silence collapsed outward from them like a shockwave. Daver didn't move. The tendons in his neck eased just. You're telling me you can blind whoever did this. I'm telling you we can make them see lies. And while they watch the wrong picture, we move. He looked past her at the fence, at the hills, at the sky that always seemed too low in this place. He was a hard man, but hard men aren't always stupid. He gave the smallest of nods. You have authorization, he said. But you own it. If this backfires, it won't, Rhea said. But if it does, make the reprimand official. Don't waste it on contempt. For a heartbeat, Daver almost smiled. He didn't. Brant oxed the cyst. And wipe those looks off your faces. If Kade fails, I'll know. If she doesn't, you'll know too. Brant's jaw jerked. Ox's eyes went flat. Marin stood taller, as if his bones had remembered their purpose. By dusk, the camp had a nervous system that didn't care about static. Lines ran where lines had not been. Lamps waited to strobe. Decoy silhouettes crouched like patient ghosts. Runners rehearsed routes between rooftops, between the ammo dump and the infirmary, between the motor pool and the breached fence. Rhea walked the nerve map with Daver at her shoulder and, behind him, men who now watched her openly. Not with respect. Not yet. With attention. It was the first warmth she had felt in this place that wasn't from a heater. When the first red flare rose again, it found Blackbridge differently wired. Rhea touched the handset of the field phone and heard, through copper and cold, the sound of her own decision. She lifted her chin. Now, she said. And she flipped the searchlights to strobe. The second assault hit Blackbridge like a hammer at midnight. Red flares bled across the sky, staining the snow as shadows poured from the tree lean in jagged waves. But this time, the camp did not stumble blind. The camp answered. The first squad of attackers crept toward the fence, confident their static screen had muted the defenders. Then the searchlights strobed alive, not wide and clumsy, but sharp pulses of white, tuned to scream falsehood into the enemy's stolen signals. Their sensors flickered, their feeds became hallucinations, phantoms of soldiers charging from places no soldier stood, gunfire from empty air. The intruders spun in confusion. The camp's rifles didn't. Fire ripped them down before they cleared the breach. Rhea crouched in the command hut, headset pressed to one ear, teleprinter clattering beside her. The copper wire she and Marin had strung to the tower carried raw, unfiltered truth, a clean heartbeat of position reports from lookouts who had mirrors and flashlights instead of radios. She sketched the data into a map that updated itself only in her mind. Every red mark was an attacker. Every blue mark was one of hers. The wraith pattern tried to drown her, but she read its rhythm, inverted it, and fed back lies. For the first time since she had entered this camp, her silence was not submission. It was work. Outside, Brant and Ox fought in the mud with grim determination. Brant's cocky grin had vanished, replaced by clenched teeth and furious discipline. Ox bellowed orders, but for once they weren't insults, they were lifelines, shouted over gunfire. Even they were beginning to feel the shift. Marin sprinted across the range, flashlight flicking coded bursts as he carried a runner's message. Bullets snapped at his heels. He dove behind the sandbags near the infirmary, rolled, and fired back with hands steadier than the night before. He was learning. And still the enemy pressed. These weren't raiders in rags. They moved like trained operatives, masked and armored, their weapons whispering in suppressed bursts. A contractor force, hired ghosts. They had expected Blackbridge to fold under its own confusion. Instead, they met resistance that seemed impossible. In the command hut, Daver loomed behind Rhea, watching her hand move across the map with the certainty of an old soldier. He didn't interrupt. He didn't mock. He just let her do what no one else could. A crackle in the line, Rhea froze. The wraith pulse shifted, a frequency she hadn't heard before. A trap within the trap. She scribbled furiously, her eyes narrowing. They had realized she was feeding noise back at them, and now they tried to bait her. "They're moving to the motor pool," she said, breath sharp. "They'll try to blow the fuel stores. If they succeed, the whole eastern wing goes with it." Daver didn't hesitate. "Ox, Brant, take your fire team and hold the pool." The men who had laughed at her days ago now shouldered rifles and ran without a word. Gunfire boomed from the east. Shadows darted among the stacked barrels. Explosions sparked, but the fuel didn't catch. Rhea's decoy silhouettes drew fire away, jerking and dancing on their motorized tracks. For every attacker fooled, another second was bought. Seconds were life. But the enemy adapted fast. A group broke off, circling toward the command hut. Rhea looked up just as glass shattered. A grenade skittered across the floor. She lunged, grabbed it, threw. The blast lit the snow outside in a mushroom of dirt and fire. Her ears rang, but she stayed on her feet. Daver stared at her, stunned not by her survival, but by the decisiveness of the act. The scarred woman he had dismissed had just saved his command post with her bare hands. The attackers pressed harder, desperate now. They breached the north fence, flooding through. Marin's voice crackled over the runner line, dozens too many, north side breaking. Rhea's mind raced. The pattern. She traced it backward, seeing the hidden rhythm inside the chaos. A command signal. The attackers moved like pieces on a board, and she saw the hand that moved them. She grabbed the field phone. Strobed the north lights at sequence Delta 3. Daver didn't question. He relayed the order. The searchlights shifted their pulse. The result was immediate. The attackers froze mid-charge, some collapsing, others firing wildly at empty ground. Their own coordination had been poisoned, turned against them. The defenders surged. Brant's rifle barked, Ox's shotgun thundered, Marin's flashlight blinked victory. Blackbridge began to believe. Yet the enemy wasn't done. A figure stepped from the tree lean, taller than the rest, movements too calm. Their commander. He carried a device like a black ribcage glowing with cold light. The Wraith's core. With it, he could override everything Rhea had built. She knew if he reached the breach, the system would collapse. The camp would fall. Her hands trembled on the map. She could hide behind the teleprinter. She could let the soldiers fight. But the truth pressed at her scar, whispering, "They will only know who you are if you show them now." Rhea slung the old rifle over her shoulder and rose. "Where do you think you're going?" Daver demanded. She met his eyes. For once, she did not look down. To finish it. Snow crunched under her boots as she crossed the yard. Bullets hissed past, smoke stung her throat, and still she walked, calm, inevitable. Brant saw her and swore under his breath. Marin shouted her name, but she didn't pause. The enemy commander raised the black device. Rhea's mind stripped it bare in an instant. Signal repeaters, harmonic disruptors, a spine of stolen tech built to enslave cons. She had designed the counter to it years ago, before they buried her name. She shouted across the snow for the first time all campaign, "Pulse on me." The searchlights turned, strobing in rhythm with her cry. The enemy commander staggered as the harmonics screamed back at him. The device sparked. His mask tilted, confusion human at last. Rhea raised her rifle. One shot. Clean. The commander fell. The device died with him. Silence poured across the battlefield. Then came the roar, Blackbridge soldiers rising, surging, sweeping the remaining attackers into retreat. The night ended not with laughter at her expense, but with cheers carried on breathless voices, echoing against the ridge. Rhea lowered her rifle. The scar on her cheek burned hot, but not with shame. For the first time since she had walked through the camp gates, she felt the weight shift. They had seen. The camp smoldered in the pale gray of morning. Smoke clung to the broken fence, rising in thin ribbons toward a sky still bruised from flares. Snow was trampled into mud and blood, but Blackbridge stood. Against odds, against betrayal, against the laughter that once poisoned its barracks, Blackbridge still breathed. And so did she. Rhea walked the parade square slowly, her boots dragging furrows through frost. Every eye followed her. Not hidden glances now, not smirks from the corner of mouths, but direct, unflinching stares. Soldiers who had mocked her days ago now stood straighter when she passed, as if silence itself demanded respect. Ox leaned against the infirmary wall, arm in a sling. He met her gaze and didn't look away. Then, awkwardly, he gave a nod. Brant, who had once sneered the loudest, muttered something low as she approached. It wasn't an insult. It was two words, hard for him to chew, but he spat them anyway. Good shot. Marin was different. He didn't nod or mutter. He stepped forward, saluted her cleanly, and said, "If you hadn't been here, I'd be dead twice over." "We all would." "Sir." She winced at the last word. But Captain Daver was already there, voice sharp as steel. "Not sir, Lieutenant." The silence that followed was heavier than cannon fire. Daver didn't blink. He had seen her tear the mask off the night, seen her carry a war on her shoulders, and in his eyes now there was no contempt. Only recognition. He raised his chin. "You kept this camp alive when none of us could. You gave us a language the enemy couldn't kill. You made soldiers out of men who would have broken. From this day, you hold rank. From this day, you answer to no one's mockery." The words fell like metals, invisible but heavier than any pin to cloth. Around her, the platoon exhaled as one body. Boots thudded as they brought themselves to attention, rifles lifted in salute. Brant, Ox, even the wounded all stood for her. Rhea's throat locked. She had never wanted parades, never cared for titles. But respect, earned not by pity, not by fear, but by fire, that was a crown she had thought forever lost. Her scar burned in the cold. For the first time, it didn't feel like shame. It felt like proof. The flames at Blackbridge died into smoke, and the snow reclaimed the ground. Yet the story of Rhea Kade would not vanish into silence again. From mockery to command, from discarded ghost to the voice that saved an entire camp, her arc had burned itself into every soldier's memory. Her scar no longer marked weakness. It marked survival. Her silence was no longer emptiness. It was strength measured in restraint until the world was ready to listen. And now, so are we. Rhea's journey is a reminder. Respect is not given. It is forged in fire, humiliation, and unyielding courage. How many times in our lives are we dismissed, laughed at, told we do not belong? And how many times do we carry a secret skill, a hidden strength, waiting for the one moment it matters most? If Rhea's story struck something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever burned to prove yourself, then stay with this channel. This is where forgotten voices rise. This is where underdogs take the stage. Subscribe. Share her story. Let others see what happens when silence finds its command. Because somewhere out there, another Rhea is waiting for her moment.